Alright, says we're live. Got the lighting just right. Eschew the intro. Here to do another new thing. Trusty 8 podcast. I am fashionably late. I had intended... Let me pick this up. My Ray-Bans fell to the floor. I had intended to invite a couple people maybe over, but as we humans sometimes do, stayed up a little later than I expected to, slept in a bit, and so now we're here. And this is really just a short clip analysis of a response I got from Dr. Joshua Sijuwades, I believe is how it should be pronounced. Maybe I'm like going overboard with some feigned accent there. I don't want to anyway, maybe I mispronounced that. Correct me if you're aware of the, but I think it's Dr. Joshua Sijuwades, would be how you pronounce that. He's a metaphysician, apparently of some credential, who was interviewed by a Canadian Catholic. So what you're going to see is myself showing up a bit later in the stream, listening to a few minutes of the back and forth. They were already answering questions from side chat, and and I, based upon a statement he had made, right, I put that out there. I didn't pull this question out of my butt, right? It was based on a statement he had made, Dr. Joshua, that is, and a question I had regarding that, regarding many, if not most, metaphysical arguments, which is one reason I have a bit of an issue with metaphysics in general, where and how it's applicable, and whether or not we can use it to explain the nature of life, the universe, and everything, right? Which is basically the claim made by most metaphysicians. So there is that. So this is it's a decent response, well articulated in my opinion, on the part of Dr. Joshua. You're going to hear a Canadian Catholic briefly read my question out loud. It will also appear on screen, and Dr. Joshua will get right into it. It's about 5 minutes or so. And I've just gone over a point by point here of where I think metaphysics, or at least many metaphysical arguments, fail to be convincing to those who are not already predisposed to belief in supernatural entities, I guess, generally, as it were. And this is, I'm just so green to the field of metaphysics. I discovered that I had read on the topic without really knowing that was what I was reading, in the past. And so as I've gotten more into this and started to understand more about philosophy and logic and different forms of argumentation, different styles, and different modes of argumentation, right? And metaphysics covers a wide range of argumentation in philosophy, and I don't want to poo-poo it altogether. So, with that being said, I guess we'll just go right into the video here. And there's something else. Oh yeah, I have some screenshots and definitions I'm going to pull up later. Definitions are going to be very important in a lot of these matters. They're different. Definitions are used in a wide range of... They vary between particular topics in philosophical reasoning, and some of them become very context dependent, so that will be important. Alright, that's my little rundown for the beginning, I suppose. Thank you if you're here, past, present, future. I don't see anybody in the side chat presently, but I don't really think that ever means anything. We'll go into it.
and the other one that arose was, what evidence do we have to posit the existence of fundamental entities? I think this is the Trustee 8 podcast.
Yeah. Okay, so well, the evidence is the evidence that we're taking are these two entities that are best accounted for by a fundamental entity. So what I'm saying is, so it's important to understand a distinction in metaphysics. There's a distinction between some metaphysicians who affirm metaphysical foundationalism and something called metaphysical infinitism, which is basically, foundationalism is the idea that there is an absolute fundamental entity at the bottom of that structure. Infinitism says basically that there is no fundamental entity because you just keep on going downwards, and each entity is grounded by a more fundamental entity, but there is no absolute fundamental entity. Now, the majority of opinion, and again, please people fact check me on this, is metaphysical foundationalism. So Schaffer, Bennett, other individuals like that, Gideon Rossen, they affirm the idea of foundationalism. And they would say, Kelly Trogdon as well, sorry, he's done a very good paper on it. I think it's in, it's left my mind. But he has a very good article on it where he's also assessing the sort of general view of foundationalism. And something interesting that he does actually state, so I was saying Kelly Trogdon, saying that it is sort of the intuitive view, like most metaphysicians affirm there to be a fundamental entity.
So I'll go ahead and just start in right there. I've got a few notes at this point. So right away, there is this acceptance of fundamentalism, which, as Dr. Joshua notes, is the most widely or popularly accepted position by metaphysicians. We should clarify that. In the school of metaphysics, this fundamentalism, and from my research, and we'll look at this a bit later, I think we'll go through the video and then bring up all the points that I found at the end. But the breakdown I have, the analysis of fundamentalism, is, he may elaborate on this a little bit later, the two entities, any given two entities that are non-fundamental are dependent on one which is. And this is this chain of regress, which is established by foundationalism, which Dr. Joshua and many believe is an intuitive, by logic, I suppose, right? Logic dictates much of the argument, and there's a difference in establishing a clear line of reasoning and establishing what we would call verifiable proof, true evidence of a fact, right? That can be universally applied and repeated, tested. So that's why metaphysics is metaphysics and physics is physics, right? I don't know that there's any way you could ever prove the laws of metaphysics, whereas there are absolute demonstrations of the laws of physics scientifically that are verified over and over again by, hundreds of thousands and millions of observers and researchers. So that is the first fundamental difference between what we're calling foundationalism or fundamentalism in metaphysics and what real science is. Okay, I think we've. I did research some of the papers he's citing here. Don't know why. I feel like I lost a note. The one thing I will say is I couldn't find the second second person he had mentioned. I did find the first one and read a short article by them, which might be in my slides. And then there's Kelly Trogdon, who he is pushing a couple times. He is published on the same site as Dr. Joshua, but Trogdon himself is behind a paywall as far as I can tell, whereas Dr. Joshua is not. So I'm not able to see the full articulation of his argument, just the abstract. If anybody has access to that, or maybe I'm just stupid, let me know and link it here. I'm absolutely interested in learning about these arguments insofar as they may be useful for a number of reasons. And we'll get to that because, as Dr. Joshua will state, and this is clearly the case in most arguments grounded in the... Uh-oh, that's not good. My headphones have low battery. Good thing they announced it to me and didn't just die, right? I'll have to switch to earbuds maybe or something. Where was I? So yes, this fundamentalism in metaphysical thinking is going to ground most presuppositional and other types of theosophical reasoning, right? You will hear it spoken of time and time again, no matter who you're talking about, Darth Dawkins, or any other number of people. I'm just going to name Darth right there because he will beat this one. He will beat you over the head with this question, as he did myself and many others. What is it that is ultimate, fundamental, and non-contingent, and eternal? We'll just throw all these terms out there, and at the end of the day, we're going to look at what fundamental really means in metaphysics and other definitions. But let's continue with the video. It's pretty quick.
Infinitivism is not really intuitive, or most metaphysicians wouldn't take that view. But where he has a problem is, what are the arguments for it? And another person who I use in that article as well, Ricky Bliss, same thing, affirming foundationalism, but she's like, this is the general view, but what are the arguments for it? And so just going with the first point, it's a consensus view that there are fundamental entities. Where the distinction is what are those fundamental entities? What is it?
Oop, and I realized I did not mute. Apologies. I'm going to stop this briefly and see if I can transfer my headphones over. It's very unfortunate. Okay. I really need a new fan. If you can't tell, I know it's pretty loud in our last episode too. Apologies. It's very, very warm in my office. I mean, I guess I could take off my shirt like Dragnot or just stay off cam. But there we go. Now I have a headphone.
My argument is trying to say, well, the fundamental entity is God. Schaffer would say it's something else. Bennett would say it's something else. Trogdon and Rossin and other people might say it's something else.
Okay, so it was Schaffer that I found, which is something that I just have to look into a little more deeply. I could not find Bennett, and Trogdon, again, was behind that paywall. If anybody knows how to get through that, or I'm not paying $29. It's like $30. So I'm sure I can find plenty of decent papers without that paywall, so that's fine. And so he stated it there. So the question to them, right, without ever proving this fundamental entity beyond the mode of their own logic, right? And so they come to it through their own reasoning. And so right away, this is like a thought experiment that's gone horribly awry. When you talk about real evidence, there is none for it. It's simply their explanation for a causal chain of events that could not, in their minds, it could not have regressed infinitely, because they have no way to conceive of infinity, and it's illogical to them. But they have no evidence that is not the case. Right? It just exists in their mind. Cool. All on the same page. We're nearly through this portion.
But yeah, I'm saying it's God, and I'm giving an argument for why it's God. But even if you don't take the general consensus to be, important, argument has been given, and I bring this up in my Fundamentality and Existence of God paper, where Bliss tries to say, well, a good reason to believe in foundationalism, so metaphysical foundationalism, is something called the kind instantiation principle. That if you hold to infinitivism, so you hold to the idea that they just keep on being, there's infinitely descending levels of fundamentality where you just keep on going down and down and down. What we don't have accounted for, which we seem to need an account of, is why the kind non-fundamental is instantiated at all. Because all you have is at each level, you have one instance being accounted for by another instance. Non-fundamental accounted for by non-fundamental, accounted for by another non-fundamental. But the question is still there. Well, why are there any non-fundamental entities at all? I mean, why is the kind instantiated? So she says that there is this principle that it just seems to be the case that you cannot posit an instance of a kind to be the reason for why the kind is instantiated in the first place.
All right, and here's where we start to go off of the rails, right? Why do you posit a fundamental entity? This kind instantiation principle. Why is the fundamental kind, or non-fundamental kind rather, instantiated at all, right? This presupposes the argument, I guess rationally makes sense, right? If I am not God, something must be God, but that's only if you believe in God. Who's to say that we are not the fundamental kind, right? We're being referred to now as the non-fundamental kind, and logically this makes sense. We cannot have created ourselves, but this, again, presupposes the belief in a creator. I would ask, why is there anything? Why would there have to be a fundamental entity? And you still cannot demonstrate that. It's your particular interpretation of logic that leads you to this conclusion. You cannot posit the kind as the reason for the kind. Well, A, that's just a weird circularity, and B, yes, you can. For instance, I mean, if we're talking about kind, and I believe Dr. Joshua is, in the same way that, like, Kent Hovind would talk about kind, right? It's a very similar language used there. So the kind would be us, people, right? We procreate. Yes, it takes two to procreate, right? Not one. And so that completely goes against your fundamental argument that one fundamental kind must have created the two non-fundamental kind, but rather now you're kind of going back to the logical reverse of that argument, right? And saying, well, there's no way that the kind could simply be the reason of themselves, but they are. That's the way nature works. Organisms, in general, tend to procreate themselves if they are like biological, whatever cellular, complex organisms or what have you, right? So you're already kind of putting your foot in your mouth here. And no disrespect to Dr. Joshua, I'm speaking generally on my issues with metaphysics, if you're just tuning in, and this particular aspect of many arguments. Okay, looks like that's what I've got there. We'll go back to the video. Almost done.
So there needs to be something that's not the instance of that kind to account for that kind being instantiated. So if we have a kind non-fundamental entity, we need a fundamental entity to account for the kind non-fundamental entity being instantiated. Now, this assumes a weak form of the PCR, a very weak form, which again is sort of trivial. It's just basically saying a dependent entity requires an explanation. And I mean, that sort of is a bit trivial, because a dependent entity is one that has an explanation. It has an explanation in what it's being dependent upon. So it does assume that. But I would not say that's a controversial form of the PSR. But it's just basically saying, if we have this kind non-fundamental, well, why is it instantiated in the first place? We seem to need an explanation. And if you take
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and stop it there, because I have a few notes here. Go into the principle of sufficient reason, and then go back to the question I posed, which was, what is your evidence, and what do we consider sufficient evidence to believe a claim? Again, this assertion that a kind cannot be responsible for itself, it doesn't really have any basis in the reality of what we know about how life has come to be established, at least on the planet Earth, right? This is simply what people believed when they had to rely upon their own intuitions and didn't have scientific explanations for many things that we now have scientific explanations for. But really, the question being posed by metaphysics is not how, right? And he's pretty clear about that. He said that repeatedly. They're not asking how. They're asking why. Why does this kind exist? Why? It's not a question of how. And then he proceeds to say that that the point would actually be trivial, right? And he said it repeatedly. I feel like I missed something that I just had, like, on the tip of my tongue. We'll finish this out, and then we'll look at the definitions, because that's going to be exceedingly important if you're going to look at metaphysical arguments, I think, and accurately assess them. And if I am inaccurately assessing things, feel free to let me know. I love to hear that shit.
Infinitism view, you don't seem to have an explanation there. Well, you're saying, well, why it is because there's another non-fundamental entity, but you're still just invoking the instance of that kind, but you're not telling me why the kind itself is instantiated in the first place. So what we have then for foundationalism is, well, if you like argument from authority, well, the general view by most leading metaphysicians is a foundationalist view. Not to say that there aren't some who favor infinitism, but the general consensus for people is that. But then there's argument that can be given for that, which is found with the kind instantiation principle. And I do bring this up again in the paper if people want to sort of refer to it and have a look.
Yeah.
And I did find a couple of Dr. Joshua's papers, although I'm not sure specifically which one he's referring to there. They're a bit heavy to read, but I will try to link them at some point here. But that's the end of my question. They're going to move on to another question here, and appreciated the fairly thorough response. I don't feel that it is enough of it's not substantive enough to convince somebody who's not already predisposed to believing, I guess, metaphysical foundationalism would be the word you're looking for there, right? And we're going to define these terms in just a sec, but I want to expound upon what he kept saying towards the end. He repeated it several times, that we seem to require an explanation. We seem to want an explanation. Who are we? Well, obviously we are people, human beings, right? This whole thought exercise exists purely in the realm of human thought, right? There's nothing outside of us dialoguing with each other and thinking, and my hat's crooked. I'm just overthinking it. Sorry. There's nothing outside of this dialogue between human beings that a world where any of this actually matters or makes any sense, right? A kind cannot be the reason for the kind. Well, the kind clearly is the reason for the kind. Procreation is how life continues to function and flourish. So logically, what do you mean by that, right? All right, so let's go on to the next phase. I'm going to wrap up pretty quick. We're going to go through some definitions. I'll talk a little bit about my takeaway on this. And can I do... I don't know how this works. Technology. New downloads. There we go. Once again, we'll share a screen. So many of the terms that Dr. Joshua is using here, where to go, are pretty well known to a lot of people who are actively studying in philosophy and theology and stuff like that. So here we have the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the Principle of Sufficient Reason. The principle of sufficient reason is a powerful and controversial philosophical principle, note that, stipulating that everything must have a reason, cause, or ground. This simple demand for thoroughgoing intelligibility yields some of the boldest and most challenging theses in the history of philosophy. In this entry, and then you can read more at Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where I got some of this, but not all. We'll proceed to our next piece here. And these may not be in any particular order, it's just the order I looked them up in. So to instantiate, to clarify that, because he says, why would the non-fundamental kind be instantiated in philosophy, is to mean of a universal or abstract concept, to have an instant or be represented by an actual example. So this makes his statements there, I guess he was reiterating the point of another, a little less intelligible to my mind. It's represented as or by an instant, right? So the instantiated kind in his model is us. We are there. But are we abstract? Are we universal philosophically? We are represented as by ourselves, right? Why are we here? That's the question. Why is the non-fundamental, i.e. humankind, instantiated at all? Why do we exist? Why are we here? Why is there anything? That's really the bold point being made there. And I think it's a little juvenile for advanced philosophical reasoning. Like, I think we can get well beyond that. Yes, we all want to know why. That's not really an argument. Here's what I got from Kelly Trogdon. Anybody can find more about this. I'm not sure that Trogdon actually agrees with Dr. Joshua, judging by just this brief analysis here I get. Says, and this is Kelly Trogdon's rundown, my research in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind is in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind. In metaphysics, one of my central interests is the notion of grounding, otherwise known as the in virtue of relation. While controversy about grounding abounds, one way to think about it is via a comparison to causation. While causation links aspects of the world together horizontally across time, grounding does so vertically across levels of reality. I think that's kind of like the genes to memes principle, but worded in a weird philosophical way, I guess. Like, isn't that Richard Dawkins' argument for memes, right? Genes pass... well, I guess this would be like the reverse of that. Like, genes go vertical and memes go horizontal. I don't know. It's weird. In the philosophy of mind, back to this. In the philosophy of mind, a central interest is the problem of consciousness, specifically the problem of finding a place for conscious experiences in a world that is fundamentally physical in nature. Okay, and here's a kind of I think Trogdon's point there is salient. Like, what they are looking for is a why, a place for this conscious experience that we share, that some may argue that is unique to human beings. I think that would be an absurd claim at this point, but some still argue that way. But is the world fundamentally physical in nature? Again, we're going to go back to what is fundamental, and that's going to come up down the line here. I don't know why I can't just... Oh, maybe there we go. And there's instantiate again. Am I going backwards? I am going backwards. We must go forwards. Here are the main branches of metaphysics. Consist of cosmology, the central branch of metaphysics that studies the origin, fundamental structure, nature, and dynamics of the universe. Ontology, the philosophy of space and time, and universal science. I'm not sure what that last one is. It's new to me, but the rest sound legit. I've heard of these. I think cosmology being the most popular, at least according to this is, I don't know, the link is just a Google search. Here's a little bit on Schaeffer, an American philosopher specializing in metaphysics and also working in epistemology, mind, and language, best known for his work on grounding and his development of monism, and is also a notable proponent of contrastivism, which I'll have to look up. I haven't heard of that. So it's important to note that all these guys are based in what they're calling grounded, or the foundationalist metaphysics, which is a very specific branch, a very specific school of thought, and as was previously recognized, is a matter of controversy. Now, it is popular. Why is it popular? Going back to Dr. Joshua's point, his and many other metaphysicians, explanation will ultimately boil down to some kind of God claim. They're all based around rationalizing their belief in an ultimate, fundamental, eternal, and non-contingent being who created all of everything. A conscious being. It must be all of that. It must be encompassed in this work. So it's crucial to them. Fundamentality. Again, from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The notion of fundamentality is used in metaphysics, aims to capture the idea... did I cut it off? I did. Damn it. That's not good. That there is something basic or primitive in the world. This metaphysical notion is related to the vernacular use of fundamental, but philosophers have also put forward various technical definitions of the notion. Among the most influential of these is the definition of absolute fundamentality in terms of ontological independence or ungroundedness. Accordingly, the notion of fundamentality is often associated with these two other technical notions covered under ontological dependence and metaphysical grounding in the encyclopedia here. Philosophers are interested in fundamentality. One reason comes from a certain view of science. It is not uncommon to think that particle physics has some special role in our unique... see, we're cutting off some word at the end here, but our unique place in the structure of reality. After all, every material entity is made up of fundamental particles. So one might think that particle physics aims to describe the fundamental level of reality, which contains the basic building blocks of nature. But again, this only takes place in here, right? We can put pen to paper and turn it into words, but at the end of the day, there's no demonstration of any of this. Particle physics, as a science, correct me, I don't know of any particle physicists who are additionally interested in these metaphysical arguments. Surely, maybe there are some, but they are unbeknownst to me. This is an abstract based on an article, which was, I think this was also from the Stanford, but I don't know, I didn't catch that. Sorry, there's not sources for everything, but if you just Google search it, I mean, most of this was, and I'm sorry if you don't like Google, use your search engine of choice, and you'll probably find something similar. This article offers a limited defense of the metaphysical infinitism. So this is the one of the alternative explanations to foundationalism. The view that there are or might be infinite chains of ontological dependence. According to widespread presupposition, there must be an ultimate ground of being, most likely a plurality of fundamental atoms. Contrary to this view, this article shows that metaphysical infinitism is internally coherent. In particular, a parallel with the debate concerning infinitism about epistemic justification is suggested, and an emergence model of being is put forward. According to the emergence model, the being of any given entity gradually arises out of an infinite series of progressively less dependent entities. Let me repeat that real quickly. The being of any given entity gradually arises out of an infinite series of progressively less dependent entities, and is not wholly transmitted, as it were, from a basic ungrounded level to all the dependent ones in a step-by-step fashion. Some objections will be considered and rebutted. So this is obviously the abstract into a article on debate in this matter. So a lot of this goes back to logically infinite regress argument. So this is supplemental. This is from the Stanford philosophy, where I found the others, metaphysical foundationalism and well-foundedness of grounding. Metaphysical foundationalism is the view that there exist some absolutely fundamental entities upon which all non-fundamental entities ultimately ontologically depend. If we have a non-fundamental entity, that's EA1, that ontologically depends on EB1, and EB2, and EB1 depends on EC1 and EC2, and EB2 depends on EC3 and EC4, and so on. Metaphysical foundationalism says that we must be able to trace the various branching strands of ontological dependence ultimately down to some fundamental entities, a collection of things that do not depend on anything, and upon which all the non-fundamental entities above them on the branch ultimately depend. Okay, lots and lots there. Do not really understand any of that? No, you do. You absolutely do, right? You've got you're caused by 2 people, they're caused by 4 people, multiply that by x squared to the root of, math, and you're going to reach some astronomical number of people that go back in a chain, infinitely long until you reach who? Person number 1? Person number, A1, 2, or what is it, So there's these things we know, right, about the chain of causation in logic and then in reality. So we can trace, like, say, our ancestry, our biological roots, and we know that, people evolved from a common ancestral kind. I hate to use that word. There's probably some common ancestor, whatever. And then they're like, well, what came before that? And not knowing scientifically is not good enough, but claiming that you can logic your way to the end of the chain is it seems like desperation. It is an act of desperation. I think we only have a few more here. There might be a couple more key definitions and abstractions for us. And oh no, I don't know where we were. Well, it's not open. I don't know what the hell's going on right now. There we go. The internet is dying. You killed it. Alright, well, I guess it's not that fucking important. I went on, I guess a little longer than I planned to here. I just wanted to make sure I went through this. So, the question I asked, Dr. Joshua to clarify for me, was there any evidence for this claim of the fundamental being or entity? And I don't think there's been any evidence presented. There have been some arguments, but there are plenty of counter arguments, which is why this is an ongoing debate. And ultimately, this is going to boil down to why I, as a non-theist, cannot accept a God claim, right? Because you cannot demonstrate that which is you claim is fundamental, ultimate, non-contingent, and eternal. Hume's theory of causation, if you can see this up now, the relation of cause and effect is pivotal in reasoning, which Hume defines as the discovery of relations between objects of comparison. Causation is a relation between objects that we employ in our reasoning in order to yield less than demonstrative knowledge of the world beyond our immediate impressions. And let's repeat that last part. A relation between objects that we employ in our reasoning in order to yield less than demonstrative knowledge of the world beyond our immediate impressions. So it's actually something that would be counterintuitive. By that, what we just read there, I've read a bit of Hume. Not going to say that I comprehend a great deal of it, but it's something that I will return to. Hume has some interesting work. The concept of causation or causality is the capacity of one variable to influence another. Notice we use the word variable, right? It is not constant. And a fundamental, ultimate, yada yada entity, by their definition, would be something that is constant, is eternal, right? It is immutable. It does not begin, nor end, nor live or die. The first variable may bring the second into existence, or may cause the incidence of the second variable to fluctuate. Right? So we can demonstrate clear causal chains by way of scientific data and things like that. But what is done by metaphysics is that causation is effectively argued for by means of like a gods of the gaps fallacy. Something, once again, we go back to what's fundamental, one thing must have caused everything. That's their rationale. They're sticking to it because they have to, because their religion compels them to. And I don't really have a better explanation for that. But this is why, I think metaphysics is freaking weird and, it's interesting. But I still haven't been swayed by these arguments. And it's something to consider. And here's the use of fundamental in philosophy specifically. Used to describe things, activities, and principles that are very important or essential. They affect the basic nature or other things, or are the most important element upon which other things depend. Right? However, you notice in philosophy there is a pluralism there. In metaphysics, when fundamentalism is ascribed, it is core. It is singular, right? One thing must have caused all. And, it's just one interpretation, it's one variation. There's all kinds of other arguments out there, but I thought it'd be important to address this, and I don't think as well articulated as some of the response was. I don't think it was actually a sufficient answer to my question in order to convince someone who's not already swayed by that belief. I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up, because were you seeing that? I can't tell who's seeing what. Notice that you're gangster. Pretty gangster myself. Get the hell out of here. Done with the podcast for today. Is this a podcast? Thank you for coming. If you're here, if you're listening, if you're watching, if you participate, if you like, share, and subscribe, that's cool too. Much love. I promise next time you see me, I'm going to shave some of this, alright? Get rid of it. It's alright. Party like a rock star. Have a great and happy Tuesday, and feel free to leave comments and criticism. Tell me how I totally messed up today, wherever you like. And we will see you next time, whenever that is. Sometime later on. I'm going to take a couple days to do really important life things. Adulting. And I'll be back. Peace. Love. Be kind. Be good to yourselves.